Okay, welcome to tonight's Maternity and Midwifery Hour. This is the week that we had the online festival. So it was absolutely fantastic. We had over 1,000 midwives and student midwives joining us. Not everybody for every second, but I think there was a real lively buzz around going around, and it was very exciting. We had some fantastic speakers, and we could not resist picking out for you some real highlights of the day. Having said that, we had to ration ourselves just to a couple of sessions, and you'll get to access others via the Matflix and via the usual sources. So enjoy. Again, stay safe. Our first speaker has arrived, and here he is. And this is Professor Jim Thornton, Professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, University of Nottingham. Jim qualified at Leeds University and has worked in Kenya and the UK. And I would say he's focused on research in obstetrics and gynecology in probably equal measure. He's lectured widely. He's been editor-in-chief of the prestigious European Journal of Obs and Gynae and the British Journal of Obs and Gynae, and is currently an editor of the European Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology. Many people will know him from his work as the chief investigator of the Growth Restriction Intervention Trial, and he's currently Deputy Director of the Nottingham Clinical Trials Unit, lead for Trent Pregnancy and Childbirth Speciality Group, and Head of Service in Obstetrics and Gynecology and Neonatal at NUH Trust. He's also quite a busy tweeter, and he writes the www.ripetomato.com blog. And I'm really looking forward to it. I understand from Jim this is his first online COVID starring role, which I know you've been writing a lot over the last few months on COVID. So this is fantastic. We've got the expert here. So welcome, Jim. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Sue. And good morning, everybody. I'm going to share the screen now, I hope. Here we go. Share. And what you've got is me saying hello from Nottingham. I don't actually have a tremendous amount of direct experience of COVID in pregnancy because Nottingham has been a very lucky city. We've been relatively spared. We've had 7 cases in Nottingham, all women nursed at home, and all the pregnancies had a good outcome. So I'm not very experienced, but I'm experienced because early on in the epidemic, I started collecting cases on my blog, which Sue mentioned, ripetomato.org, and because I was a bit irritated, there seemed to be an awful lot of opinion about COVID-19, and I wanted to collect the raw data, all the scientific reports. I thought it would be a small project and I might collect a dozen papers. It's turned into a mega project. When I prepared these slides last week, there were 154, and there's been 10 more in the last week. We're now running at 164 original scientific reports on COVID-19 in pregnancy. And the whole project has blown into all sorts of stuff. We've got newspaper articles and registries and things as well. I need to thank my 2 main collaborators who've been helping me with this, Keelan O'Donoghue from Cork in the Republic of Ireland, and my colleague in Nottingham, Kate Walker. And what I'm going to do today is just take you through the epidemic and or the pandemic, and what we knew early on in the pandemic and what we know now. And I'm going to be talking entirely about the primary science. I'm not talking about reviews or opinions or guidelines. They're all useful stuff, but I'm a primary science sort of person, so I'm going to tell you what the primary science shows. I'll begin with the background because there had been 2 previous coronavirus epidemics, SARS and MERS, which were pretty nasty in pregnancy. Then I'll tell you about the early reports from China and from other centers, which were initially, I think, rather misleading. But eventually we started to get unbiased data from Italy, Netherlands and France, and then eventually we got the best data of all, and I'm going to be raving about this study, the UCOS study, which I think is the best data ever. And then finally, I'll tell you some of our own original review, looking at the risks to the baby of different ways of caring for the baby. So background, SARS and MERS, 2002 and 2018, these were much more severe conditions, but many fewer people were infected. It was about 1,000 or so with both of them, and not very many pregnant women. But this slide shows the review article of all the pregnant women who were infected with SARS during that epidemic in 2002-3. There were only 12, but the outlook was grim. 4 of them miscarried, and really 3 of them, that's 25% of that small, albeit small, sample of mothers died of SARS. I mean, that was an unbelievably severe condition in pregnancy. And MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, there were only 11 pregnant women there. But again, look what happened. 3 of the mothers died. These were terrible, terrible conditions. And I want to take you back now to what we knew at the start of the epidemic in February and March. So just to remind you, in February, there were reports of a few students from China coming to England and being diagnosed, and they were isolated in their student lodgings in Chester and places like that. But I think most of us were probably not attending terribly closely. I certainly wasn't. Then on the 5th of March, UK had its first death, and a 70-year-old woman died in Reading. Then on the 16th of March, Boris made his first speech to the nation advising isolation. This wasn't the lockdown, this was the advisory speech. That was on the 16th of March, and then on the 23rd of March. So this is the day that this paper was published in the Lancet. Boris announced the legal lockdown under which we are still living. So this was the situation on the very same day that Boris made that speech. And there were 9 cases. It was from one hospital in Wuhan, and the outlook was good. The outlook was good. No mothers died, no babies died, no severe disease. But, well, that's not very much, is it really? Can we be reassured by that? Well, a little later, on the 6th of April, just to put you in the picture for the timeline here, Boris Johnson went to ICU on the 6th of April. So this was published on the same day. I think we can all remember where we were when he moved to intensive care. And on the 6th of April, the National Health Commission of China, so that published what was basically a registry-based series of every single case of women infected with COVID-19 in Wuhan. So that was the city. Wuhan is a huge city. It's a population about the same as London, about 12 million people. And in that city, there had been 118 cases of pregnant women with COVID-19. There'd been some miscarriages, some terminations. All the terminations were done because the women were worried about COVID-19. 68 births, so quite a few preterm, although a lot of them were iatrogenic, and 70 babies, no deaths, and no mothers had died. So people were, again, this was reassuring data, but did we believe it? I'm not sure that we did. I'm not sure whether we do believe data from China. That's a horrible thing to say, but they haven't always been terribly honest. But importantly, a few days earlier from New York, the first reports had appeared from the Presbyterian Hospital, where 7 women had been admitted with COVID and 2 of them had ended up on intensive care. And the same day, again, the 6th of April, there were reports of 5 women in intensive care from the Netherlands, and the same day as well, 7 women from Lombardy, that's the severely affected region of Italy, having either CPAP or ventilation. So it was all very well saying that everything was going to be fine, but it wasn't quite. I don't think people quite believed. There was also a lot of newspaper reports, and here now I've been collecting all the news reports, and I added this morning the news of the triplets in Mexico. But at that point, there had been 130. Sorry, up to now, there's been 132 news reports, and they have included 26 mothers who have died, so very high mortality. But these are biased. You can see immediately, and these reports are the older reports up to the 16th of April, and they include Carrie Simons. They include on the left, as you look at it, Michaela Persico, who is the girlfriend of Juventus footballer Daniel Rugani. She got it in pregnancy, but all went well. The nurse from Luton, who you can see who did die. The woman who was all over Twitter because she was severely ill, was tweeting her condition. I've forgotten her name, but she recovered and delivered a couple of weeks ago. And I want to draw your attention to the bottom right, to Oliver. He was just a simple birth from Madrid who got into the newspapers. But what happened to Oliver? His mother had relatively mild COVID, but the doctors said, oh, you've got COVID. It's a tremendously dangerous condition. We're going to deliver you by cesarean section. You mustn't breastfeed Oliver, and Oliver must be taken away from you and isolated in special care for 2 weeks. And that is indeed what happened to poor old Oliver. He was separated, he was artificially fed and isolated for a fortnight. And the news report showed how he survived, and his mother, of course, survived, and eventually they were reunited. And at the end of this talk, I want to show you how wrong I think that was. So here we were on the 16th of April, but where are we now? Well, we're a lot better off. We now have a number of registries, that is regional surveys of COVID-19. I'm going to take you through three of, I think, the best. The Lombardy one is all the 12 hospitals in the center of northern Italy around the epidemic. And each of these registries has had many reports, but the data I'm giving you is the latest report for them. So Lombardy, 77 women, and pretty severe. There were 14 severe cases, one woman on ECMO, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. That is a very, very bad thing to happen to you, but no women died. 57 babies, 4 positive, no deaths. The Netherlands, 206 ICU and 1 mother died, and 66 births so far, no babies died or infected. And France, it's not really a registry, it's the GROG Group, Recherche Obstetrics and Gynecology. So this is a group that works together to report things. So it might be slightly biased because they tend to be in rather high-powered units, but they report a very large series, 600, and quite a lot of severe disease, 29 mothers ventilated, 6 with ECMO, 1 mother died, and 197 babies, 8 died, and 2 tested positive. So that was these are the series until a few weeks ago, and I hope you've all seen this, the UCOS study in the BMJ. And I always say when I'm talking, if you've been asleep, wake up now, and if you're planning to go to sleep, you can watch this slide and then go to sleep. This is the most important data in the world on UCOS. The leader is Marian Knight, who is one of my heroes, and she set the study up 9 years ago, ready for the epidemic, and she persuaded every single obstetric unit in the UK to report their cases. And so this is unbiased. She also blogged about the study, if anyone is interested. I put the link at the bottom. She blogged about how she did it and what she did. It's worth reading. It's a very moving blog because her father got COVID right at the start of her study and died 2 weeks into the study. And she talks about that. So it reminds us what a serious condition this is. Here's the data. 194 obstetric units, 400 plus women. And this is the first data that can give us a handle on what is the chance of being admitted with COVID-19 per birth. You see, over this period of time, there were about 170,000 births. So we can actually say what the risk per birth of getting admitted with COVID-19, and it's about 5 per 1,000. Okay, that's data we haven't had before. Over half the women belong to Black, Asian, or minority ethnic groups. This is a shocking and striking statistic. 56% of them. Nearly 70% were overweight or obese, and nearly half were aged over 35, and about 1/3 had a pre-existing comorbidity. And here are the outcomes. 10% of women needed respiratory support. Remember, this is respiratory support includes oxygen. They weren't all ventilated. But 5 women, that's 1%, died. This is the first study which has separated COVID-19 direct deaths from other causes. We can't, of course, rule out the possibility that other causes happened because of organizational changes related to COVID-19, but 3 of the 5 were directly due to COVID-19. And that's 1%. That is, and I just want to set that figure in context. On one account, 99% of women survived, so it's a low risk. But it's not a low risk. The risk of a woman dying in pregnancy in a developed country today is round about 1 in 10,000, and most of those deaths are sort of indirect deaths due to violence or cancer and things like that. The chance of dying in pregnancy is very low. 1% is 100 times higher than the background risk of a mother dying in pregnancy. So although this is it's not as severe as SARS and MERS, not by a long way, it is still a severe condition and we need to take it seriously. 266 women had given birth or ended the pregnancy. 3 had stillbirths, 4 neonatal deaths, and 12 of the babies, 5%, were infected. 6 of them within 12 hours. Now, finally, I just want to tell you about our study. So we have been collecting all these reports and we analysed them all together. The one original thing that we did was a lot of the reports. People keep writing about the same cases. The Chinese were very bad about that, but also the New York doctors are forever publishing the same case in different papers. So we put a lot of effort into trying to take out the duplicates, and we did our best. And I'm going to present you the result now. We reckon that we could find now 666, unfortunate number, of pregnancies where the baby's infection status was given. So 4% of the babies had a positive SARS-CoV-2 test. And we looked at how this compared with the route of birth. It was 2.7% in the vaginally born babies and over 5% in the cesareans. Now that doesn't mean that vaginal birth is good for infection or cesarean is harmful, because obviously it isn't a randomized trial. There'll be all sorts of biases in there, but there's no evidence to point to cesarean being an indication. These are just swab positive. No babies died due to COVID-19. There have been deaths. There's been, I think, 3 babies who have died in this series, but they died of extreme prematurity or other complications, not from the COVID-19. There's the numbers there. What about breastfeeding status? Well, again, the numbers are a bit smaller because papers are a bit less good at reporting the breastfeeding or the feeding status of the babies. But of the babies who were breastfed, 4.7% infected, formula fed 5.3%, and some separated babies were fed express breast milk, tiny numbers. 1 of them got infected. Again, there's no data here suggesting that breastfeeding is harmful. In fact, if anything, it's to the opposite direction. Of course, there's all sorts of other excellent reasons why you would want to breastfeed if you have COVID, because you're giving the baby good COVID antibodies in the breast milk. It's probably the best treatment the baby can get. What about isolation of the baby? The poor old baby from Madrid. Well, there have been 46, again, isolation is not very well reported, but 6 of the 46 isolated babies got infected, whereas only 4 of 107 who were nursed with the mother got infected. So in summary, I want to remind you that COVID-19 is a very serious condition for the mother. It's not as serious as SARS and MERS, and the mortality rate is about the same as non-pregnant women of the same age and the same risk factors as in the non-pregnant, but it is still a very serious condition. But neonatal COVID-19 is not a very serious condition. Infection is uncommon, very rarely symptomatic. I don't think any babies have died directly from neonatal infection. And the data thus far suggests that it's perfectly safe and probably recommended to be born vaginally, to be breastfed, and to be nursed with your mother. Thank you.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much, Jim. Gosh, my brain is full of all these statistics. I don't quite know where to start with whatever. I mean, I wondered about the triplets. I know the report came out in the media this morning of the triplets born. Was it in?
I knew you were going to ask me that. They were in Mexico. It's a press association report, and there are very, very scanty details. I added it to my news reports today. If anybody is following Ripe Tomato, I also bang up every news report I can find. All we know is that the minister announced them. They were born actually a few weeks ago, but according to the minister, they were infected on the day of birth. The mother had mild disease, and and therefore the headlines are, these are the earliest babies to ever been infected. But we're reported as I say, there's only a few lines in the paper. It's reported that they're doing fine. They aren't, of course, in our series.
No, I think the news report I heard was that they were thinking about the placental issues around COVID.
There's a lot of stuff about placental issues around COVID. I'm not a placental expert, but I'm very skeptical of a lot of it. There are people who claim to have seen the COVID virus on electron microscopy in the placenta. Well, I don't know, could be true. And there are people who have reported rather ragged placentas, with thrombosis and things like that. But of course, in my experience, pretty much every placenta you look at has evidence of thrombosis and badness in it. Whether it's really to do with the COVID or whether it's coincidental, I'm not qualified to comment. It is important to remember, though, that there have been bad outcomes for the baby in COVID pregnancies, but they have almost invariably been associated with the mother who's been very seriously ill. Women at 22 weeks who have ventilated and hypoxic have miscarried. The baby dies. But I don't think, if you read the reports, read the raw data, I don't think the baby died directly of COVID. It died of the extreme prematurity, which, of course, the prematurity probably was brought on by the mother's COVID disease, but it's not a direct viral problem.
No, that's really good. Thank you, Jim. I have got some questions coming through, and my eyes are going this way because this is where the questions
far away
are coming through. Okay, the UCOS statistics. People like the UCOS. We like UCOS. You've got a sense on this, including the scary 1% maternal mortality rate. Is it just for those admitted with COVID-19? So we don't know how many have had it and not needed treatment. General info seems to be there is no more risk to pregnant people than the rest of the population.
Yes, that's a very good question. The UCOS specifically included women with with SARS-CoV-2 who were admitted to hospital. So it did include most of the cases because if the woman, for example, I think our 7 cases in Nottingham were included because although they were nursed at home with their COVID, they were admitted to have the baby. So, if you got into the entry definition was getting into hospital and testing positive or having a clinical diagnosis of positive. Some people were clinically diagnosed but not swabbed in the early part of the epidemic. So you're quite right. There will be some women who have been completely nursed at home who weren't in the UCOS study, but I suspect not a very large number.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I've got a question. That was Maeve Reagan that asked that question. The second one is from Sarah Elizabeth. Thank you so much for this information. Very useful. I'm aware that it's another huge topic, but are there any places you can point us in terms of breastfeeding and COVID-19?
Well, the best data is what I've just presented to you. I think that's the best. But I would draw your attention to a paper which I can't remember the reference, but it's on my list on ripe tomato. There was a beautiful study from New York where they looked at donated breast milk from quite a large number of women who had passed COVID-19 in New York. The idea is that they were indeed considering giving the breast milk to infected babies as an immune therapy. I don't think they ever got round to doing that, but they tested for IgG, and they were obviously positive because that's always positive in breast milk, but they tested for IgA, which is the very high level, very not immunogenetic, the good antibody, and there were very high levels of anti-SARS-CoV-2 IgA in the breast milk. Okay. Now, that doesn't prove that breast milk is good, but my golly, it looks as if it probably is. And if it was my daughter having a baby with COVID, I would be very strongly recommending her to breastfeed. I think it's, the scientific sort of basic science supports breastfeeding, and the observational epidemiology also supports breastfeeding.
Well, I think some of the statistics you presented, of course, and you did emphasise they were small, but they do kind of suggest that, don't they? That's fantastic. I've got another question from Katharina Schramm. Good morning, Jim. I note your conclusions are very important both for mothers and their babies. Mortality similar to non-pregnant women of the same age. Does this mean you are convinced pregnancy does not add any extra risk to the mother?
Well, I think I am more or less convinced of that. Yes, that's what the evidence suggests. It's a bit surprising because I can see why you're asking that question, Catherine, because SARS and MERS were very different. It did add an extra risk, and influenza, it adds an extra risk. But and so I suppose it's still early days, and I wouldn't want to say what the final when it's all finished and the sort of clever epidemiologists work it all out, whether we will find there's a slightly increased risk to the mother, I don't know. But at the moment, I think the data is pretty clear that it does not add an additional risk to the mother.
Oh, fabulous! Thank you. I mean, it is interesting because you're sort of it's suggesting that we're going to learn a lot more, which I know people have said, and I suppose I'm reinforcing. We're going to learn a lot more about the whole nature of CV-19 long after it's passed. If we can imagine it passing, and at the moment it feels though it's never going to go, but it will. And I think your starting point of the SARS and MERS was a really useful one to remind us about it. This isn't the only thing that can affect women, pregnant and childbearing women. So that's really helpful. I think I haven't got any more questions through here. I had a little.
I think it's important just while you're thinking, it's important to remember where we are now and where we were in early March. The situation was really, quite rightly, very alarming for pregnancy at the end of February, early March, and the Prime Minister was going into intensive care. Things were really very worrying. And I'm not saying they're not worrying now. This is I wouldn't want to play this down at all. This is still, 100 times increased risk of the mothers dying in pregnancy. But it's a lot less alarming than it was in early March.
And I think the stance that you've taken with such clear sort of information, the way that the whole ripe tomato process works, I think is really helpful, because I think there is a lot of opinion about, and there's a lot of stories in the press. And as you say, some of the stories are repeated or they've taken different aspects. And I think it's been fantastic to have a very clear view of COVID in context, taking the statistics from all over the world. So it's fantastic. So we have 1,013 participants from all over the world listening in. and we've been privileged to have you presenting information and data from all over the world. So I'd like to say a huge thank you to you.
Well, if I can I'll have a plug. 1,000 of you log in on Ripe Tomato every day, and you'll get the latest paper. It really is just pouring in. There's amazing series, big stuff. It is. I just love updating because there's so much data just coming in every day. So go on, log in and see what's new, and you'll find out about the Mexican triplets. They are the second set of triplets that have been born with COVID-19 in Mexico. You didn't know that, did you? No. The other set, I'm afraid, were born very prematurely. 2 of them died, 1 survived. Both newspaper reports, not scientific reports, but all on Ripe Tomato. Everything's there. Okay, well,
I'd support that because it's a very accessible site, which makes it very interesting because you have lots of information, but it is a very interesting and varied site, and it is the place to go if you really want to be informed. So there was one more question.
Come on.
From Maria. Do you think the data you presented is filtering into practice, or are babies still being separated from their mothers in this country?
Oh, that is a very good question. I think I'd like to pay tribute to the Royal College of Obstetricians, the Royal College of Midwives, who actually, right from the beginning of the epidemic, said that there wasn't much evidence for cesarean or isolation or not breastfeeding. Now, rightly, they were cautious at the beginning because they didn't really know, because no one knew, and that was the right thing to do. But they urged that breastfeeding was probably safe. I'm afraid that's not true of the rest of the world. I don't want to single out countries, but the rest, and if there are international people listening now, I think we really, if you take away one message, COVID-19 is not in itself an indication for cesarean. It's not in itself an indication for artificial feeding, and it's not in itself an indication for separating the baby from the mother. If that message could reach other countries of the world, I think it would be a useful thing, and I'd like to end on that note.
And I think that's a fantastic place to end, and I know that you're having to rush off to another commitment, so thank you so much, Jim. We have got the next session, which is Leadership in a Crisis, and I'm thrilled. We have Linda Machakaire, and I hope I've pronounced that correctly.
Perfect.
I always call her Linda because I'm lazy with words. I don't want to get it wrong. Who's the head of midwifery at Lewisham and Greenwich NHS. She's a passionate capital midwife. She arrived from Zimbabwe to start a mental health course, which actually turned out to be midwifery, which I'd love to hear the whole story behind that. And ever since, and it's a real bonus for midwifery, I have to say, she's worked in all areas of midwifery. She's been a lead midwife in intrapartum care, consultant midwife, and more recently a head of midwifery. And in one role, she earned the title BME, and that stands for Best Midwife Ever, which is her as her Twitter handle. She's a keen runner, and she raises money for charities close to her heart. And she's also a social media, I would say she's a social media influencer. She's certainly an active tweeter and is much loved by her team. And I'm handing over to you, Linda. The screen is yours now. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. It's so great for me to be here today, and thank you for inviting me to speak on here. Since taking up the post of head of midwifery, I've had a few challenges, and COVID, as with everybody else, has been one big challenge, and there've been different aspects of it that have been challenging. So this is what I hope to talk about today. And I like storytelling. So if at times it just seems I've gone off somewhere telling a story, that's me. That's just how I get things across. But it's such a pleasure, and people are envious. So I've told a few people today, I'm going to a festival. It's like, will you be drinking? So here we go. So just confirm you can see my slides? Oh, thank you very much. So as I haven't been long in this post, less than a year, I still call myself a preceptee hom, especially when the finance guy comes to ask me questions. I say, remember I'm a preceptee? And as I said, I'm just going to take you through our apologies. So I work in Lewisham Hospital, which is in South East London, and it's part of a big trust, Lewisham and Greenwich Trust. And it covers 3 main big boroughs, and we have a director of midwifery. She's director of everything, actually. But in terms of how we fit in with this, what I'm telling you today, we have a head of midwifery on each of the acute sites. So the acute sites are just at Lewisham and Greenwich. Bexley, lots of changes have happened in that area. So a few women of Bexley come and birth at Greenwich, and some go to Durham Hospital, Durham Valley, and King's, and so on. But there's no acute services, maternity services operating out of Bexley, but certainly a hub, and people have antenatal and postnatal care and so on. So as a trust, in 2019, we had 7,799 births, and our home births were 104, and it's unevenly split between the boroughs, but it gives us a rate of just about 1.3%. 2 community matrons report to me, and they oversee the whole service with different teams in there. So what happens earlier in the year? We hear stories out of China. I know you've had a thrilling presentation, which I caught, the first presentation by Jim. But COVID, so as it hits the UK and the impact, if we remember, lockdown happened, I think it was the 23rd or thereabouts. And very, very quickly, London Ambulance became inundated with just the amount of calls, first of all. And then secondly, with just response times. And it became very, very clear that although as a transfer rate from home births into hospital, it was quite low, very, very low. For women that do need to transfer in, we wouldn't be safely able to do so. So a very, very hard decision where we also contemplated, do we run a suspended service? Do we run a service that is just for multits, for example? But it was very clear that we just needed to suspend our service. And that is what we did, because at that same time when London Ambulance was struggling, then staff starting to become ill with COVID, either staff themselves or they had people in their homes with symptoms. And in those very early days, it wasn't very clear, you know, how long do you stay off? 7 days, 14 days? Is it if you've got symptoms, if your relatives got symptoms? I don't know if you can take yourselves back there, but it wasn't just the midwifery force that was affected, it was the doctors as well. But in terms of the home birth service, it was certainly the midwifery service. And we couldn't safely staff the service just in the acute setting. So we painfully had to deal with that as well. And the whole PPE thing as well. How much do you wear? What does AGP mean, aerosol generating? What do we have in maternity that's aerosol generating? If you remember right at the beginning as well, there wasn't specific things to help us out in what exactly do it. So we were making things up as we went along. A phrase I got from Kate Brintworth, regional CMO for London, was that, you know, we were building the road as we walked on it. And certainly that's what we had to do. And, you know, women breathing heavily in second stage, is that aerosol generating? You know, is breathing a lot of Internox or whatever. So we made the painful decision to suspend our home birth services on the 27th of March. And, you know, very quickly, you then realize the impact. You know, you have a single mum, she's having a 4th baby, she's having a home birth because of childcare issues, or, you know, somebody was going to come and be with her and look after her kids while she was in labor and so on. So you start getting those calls and like, how do I do this now that you wanted me to come to your birth center? So what that also meant is very much the guidance as it was coming out was limit contact with women. If you're going to do a face-to-face postnatal, for example, do as much as you can over the phone, and then you're literally in and out of the house. It sounded like we needed to have capes and just whiz in, whiz out. We established community hubs, and these have been very popular with midwives. And what that has given them is more time to give midwifery time, because they weren't spending that time driving from house to house, finding a place to park and so on. Also, very much, you're not then having that lone work, let me make the decisions, or who do I call? If you've got somebody next door in the hub that you're in, you then speak to them and bounce things off and so on. So midwives really like this, but of course, equally important is this working for women? And that's questions we have to answer. So what we also suspended is our continuity teams. And this was also around just trying to adequately staff the services we had still going. What was happening at Pan London is the head directors of midwifery, heads of midwifery started a weekly call chaired by the regional CMO, and London Ambulance would come on that call. And as time went on, it looked like the picture was getting better. As we know that the fire service then very much supported London Ambulance, so their response times got better, and we kept an eye on this as time was going. So as it started to improve, and as staff were coming back to work and less staff going off, it was then, when do we bring back our service? So, you know, when you repeatedly have a conversation and you're thinking, everybody knows what you're talking about. And I think this is exactly what happened. So we're talking about re-establishing our service. How do we do that? So we informed the board. We did a partner declaration form, and this was around really screening questions and setting out the expectations. It's given at 36 weeks, and the expectations are, you know, we will screen for symptoms. You know, at the time when we're talking about red and green women. So if we suspect you've got COVID, you become red, it's best to have your baby in hospital, continuous monitoring and all those. So all sounds very good. And then on a Friday, Edie, our e-midwife, that's her actually, that's the image of her. She's on Twitter, Facebook, she's kind of everywhere. Very good way of sending our messages out. Sends a message, say, oh, we'll be re-establishing our services on the 4th of March, which would have been about 5 weeks from suspension. And this isn't an issue at all, is it? You know, Edie's just telling people what we're doing. Till half of your midwives, or just over half, start saying, but we don't know this. And these midwives are supposed to be delivering the service proper. I can never do it like Mr. Simpson would do it, but it was like, oh, how has this happened? And immediately, so you can imagine it's the Friday, and I just get these emails start pinging in. I had a couple of phone calls, but the rest was via email. And so I'm sitting and going, but how has this happened? We've been talking about it for ages. You know, everybody must know about this, you know. But there was very much a sentiment from midwives on the floor, on community midwives, that they'd been undervalued, felt discriminated against. And I mean, these are direct quotes. I spent a weekend reading emails of people just saying, this is not okay, you're forcing us to do this. It's illegal, we're in lockdown. How can you be asking us to go into people's houses for an extended period of time, 12 hours sometimes even longer, you know, changing shifts and so on. And the guidance before was we need to minimize time. You've told us to fly into people's houses and come out quickly. So how is this? And home birth is not an essential service. Why are we putting choice above our own personal safety? So each email I read was just like a little, I've really aggrieved people. I took it really, really personally. And I think that's just the caring side coming out. But you don't want to ever cause upset. And I realized it caused major, major upset. And then the questions were also, you know, what did infection prevention said about this? What did our Maternity Voices Partnership think about this? We're going to go to the unions. How can this happen? So took a deep breath in. And as I was running the streets of, I'm saying streets, but it's normally hills, bad hills in just outside Chislehurst, in those places. You know, and things come to me when I'm running a lot. And it was like, okay, first thing I have to say is just take ownership. A contrite, I am sorry. And it's to just say that and mean it and just say it wholeheartedly. And I said, but how do I do this? I can't send an email saying sorry, or e.g. to say, oh, sorry, guys. So I quickly thought, let me set up a couple of one after the other, as in 2 consecutive days, calls open to every community midwife and speak to them directly. And this is what we did, set them up. And the first call was going to be on International Day of the Midwife. And on that first call and the second call, I just started with a very, very unreserved apology and just said, I'm sorry this has happened, but please, let's go forward together. Help me try and, let's work together to resolve this. And what I did with all the emails I received, I read each and every one and collated them into a log. So each concern, and some of them would be saying the same thing, but I collated it so that to make them separate issues, I then came up with 37 separate issues or things people had asked. These calls were an hour and a half, and I made it clear that it can be longer if people need it. But I then asked Kate Brintworth, one of Jackie Dunkley-Bent's deputies, to come on for 10 to 15 minutes. She's got a very busy schedule, but I said, please, at 5 o'clock on each day, we would have been on for about half an hour, just come on. And I personally, for me, I thought I felt I needed that bit of support. But it was just for people to hear it from somebody who had a pan-London view as well as to what was happening elsewhere. But on International Day of the Midwife, what the 2 community matrons did, we've got 11 hubs. They went to each hub with cakes and fruits and goodies to eat and just spoke to people. So it was a good foundation as well for when the call came on. And this is just an example of what the log looked like. Reinstatement of the service without consultation is upsetting, and that was around apology. RAG rated each concern. Number 4 there was, it's not an essential service. And what Kate helped me reinforce was that, for a lot of women, the anxiety was there as well, actually, about coming into hospital. And we all know the benefits of being in a midwifery-led environment, and in terms of, analgesia use, length of labor, less intervention, and so on. And we facilitating choice, yes, but it is actually an essential service. It's an essential service to provide intrapartum care, and it's just realizing our role in that, and that with the staffing much better, with support from London Ambulance, we can actually do this. As I said, there were 37 things logged on. So we reinstated the service, and since then, I'm glad to say we've had quite a few home births, 2 on Sunday. I was actually on call for the service. So we had 2 and then a third one also. So they almost ran into each other. But we've gone back online, and I'm glad to say, with the issues log, most things have turned green. There's still some things to work on. But it was certainly something we then owned together to say, let's do this. The MVP had our MVP very active in terms of setting objectives for the year. We worked together, and it certainly expressed to us that whilst we understand it's a pandemic, it was still very important to co-produce and work together. And we acknowledge that as things hit with the pandemic, we were suddenly doing things, and they'd also find out from Facebook, as a visiting policy came in, we'd just announce it and so on without much consultation. So that's come back online as well. So lessons from this, what should I do for the future? Please consult the key people to make something work, even in a pandemic. Please do so. And what's that? As it turned out, it was something to go over a crisis, and I've very much kept that going. So every week we have a call, and it's evolved to other things where people express other issues or things, but it's definitely said to people, I'm very accessible. And whilst out in the hubs and people aren't coming in as much, it's very important that we keep that dialogue and keep talking. And, you know, we're having quite a number of women choosing home births because it's then very much a service that we're providing. And in doing this, I think it then really lets us live our values, our trust values about being respectful and just learning together and growing together. Thank you.
That's great, Linda. Thank you so much. I think we've been privileged to hear that story. I think having the stories are really vivid. You've discussed it very honestly and very vividly, and it feels to me as though possibly this has made the team much more strong and kind of dynamic, just having had that difficult process, which you've dealt with such integrity and kind of courage. I think is fantastic. Also, I'd like to say I love the background you have to your office. I have to make this comment to all of the audience that often people with the Zoom techniques, everyone looks at the bookshelves. I have my bookshelf here. Linda's got a very busy, very typical office. You can see she's a busy person, and we've had someone coming in.
My boss.
And you did brilliantly. So that was fantastic. Now I do have a question. I'm putting my eyes this way because I have another screen with the questions on.
No,
and this is a question from Maeve Regan, who says it's such a shame that home birth and continuity teams are always the first to be suspended in crisis. Though this was a big crisis, especially when women want to avoid hospital, which I think you focused on. How can we build better infrastructure to protect these vital services in the future? Fantastic question, May.
Thank you, May. I guess for me, and as an organisation, and it is about having those solid foundations or building blocks to then, I mean, before the lockdown, before the pandemic hit us in the way that it did, we had actually done our business continuity plan. And you try and imagine something that would impact your services so much, and how would you then carry on with, as we call it, business as usual. And all we had to go by was a very bad snowstorm. And we don't really get them bad here. So the gentleman that was facilitating our business continuity plan, or trying to draw it up, kept going on. So he made the snowstorm last for days. And then he kept saying, and then, you know, you're down to 75% staff, you're down to 50% staff. This is day number 4. Now your stock's not coming in. How do you carry on? And when he went to day number 5, I said to him, look, dude, what you're talking about now would need Will Smith. This would only happen in the movies, I said to him. Things then come back online. The snow melts here. Come on. This is what I said to this gentleman. Little did I know that something that had we've never ever experienced anything like this, suddenly would floor us so badly. And I guess what was really important is during the pandemic was to how the fear and anxiety from staff for self was really, really palpable. I remember walking on Labour ward one day, again, when the PPE seemed to have changed between morning and afternoon, and having quite a few people sitting right in front of me. But I had one tall person really up in my face, really going, why are you asking us to do this? And this particular discussion was around saying surgical masks were perfectly safe to wear. And there was very much a feeling, no, we want FFP3. We want to wear everything that HDU is wearing. Why aren't you giving it to us? So I guess with anything, you have to then say, how can I do the best for the majority? And I know there's trusts that did not suspend their continuity services. And certainly with 2020 vision, the hindsight that we have, it's like it was really important because the pathway we then came up with was very disjointed. Telephone conversation to do your booking, the bloods are done by somebody else and someone else, you know, while they explain your scan as well. And then you have another phone call at 16 weeks. And then that could be 3 different people. And it's saying, how could we have kept continuity even with the adjustments that we had to make? And you can only do that and do the best for everybody, but also only by consulting with everybody and doing that teamwork. So I don't know if I'm answering your question very well, May, but certainly in trying to describe why we felt we had to, it was very painful to suspend home birth services, because in as much as I knew that staff are scared to wear COVID, and the unfortunate outcome of part of what's happened is it's made a lot of people feel like the public's the enemy. And when I say the public, it's women who use our services. So the fear of going into people's houses, it made people the enemy. Whereas, and we know we've been called this now, we've unwittingly just given each other COVID at work because because I'm familiar with somebody, I wasn't wearing the same PPE. That's before we were all asked to wear masks, by the way. All has got one handy. Is you have people at work. So you come in at work, you're working with 8 other midwives on labour ward, you have 4 doctors on call, a couple of anaesthetists, then you've got the cleaners, you've got the support workers, you've got the porters that are coming in and out. But you're familiar with those people, and we weren't taking the same precautions. But say go into someone's home to do a postnatal check, we're having big problems around that. So it was the managing of staff fear and what's best for everybody that became difficult. And I would like to say whether second wave or going forward, we were hit with something similar or remotely similar, that we've learned a lot that we can take into the next thing.
I think you've illustrated that brilliantly, actually. Thank you. And Rebecca, which is similar to what you've been saying in a way, that says there were other trusts, West Middlesex and Chelsea and Westminster, that continued with their home birth service during the pandemic. Could Lewisham Trust not instate the same measures as the former trusts to keep offering the home birth service right from the start of the pandemic? That's kind of really back to hindsight, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, just to add, we did look at how can we offer the LAS support, and we looked into the private ambulances, and it was something like 2.1 thousand for a 24-hour period. And we were and I know the Jewish community has their own ambulance service as well. So it's not like we didn't look, how can we carry, we didn't look at how can we, but as soon as it was very clear we could reinstate, we did.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Trixie Machakaire, hi Trixie, says, you demonstrated great visible leadership and listening skills. How did you envision staff and helping them to put their fear into appropriate place? A mix of listening but not pandering, such as people wanting to wear full PPE. I think you might have answered that one.
Yeah.
Do you have?
I think I have. But I suppose the other thing is when guidance comes out, unless it's very, very clear, or you can demonstrate it by looking at your population and saying this will not work for us. So typical example would be RCOG recommended we drop GTTs, but we thought as a trust for our population, we needed to find a way to carry on doing glucose tolerance tests, because we felt it's very important to diagnose it using the gold standard. And we've carried on, so we've gone against that guidance. But when guidance is there, it's to then fully adopt it, and as a leader to really, so when the PPE would change, I'll then go and we'd put up signs, and you have to say something with conviction. You can't wash things over people's eyes, to use that expression. It has to come from here, and that's what I try and do on a daily basis.
That's fab. Now we have 2 comments. One person's would love to know about your story from mental health to midwifery, but I think I'm going to keep you in reserve for another session, because I think that will be a really good story. So Michelle, you'll just have to wait for the next instalment of Linda's story. And then, because I think the next question is from Leslie. Can be a lonely job as a head of midwifery, and that's very true, particularly in a crisis. What support from the board / peers have you had? And you've got probably a minute to do that answer.
No, that's fine. I mean, I have a fantastic boss, and I can always go to her for issues. And I think what I very much have tried to do in all the senior roles I've had is ensure I've got support laterally, I've got support from above, and I've got support from the team that I'm actually leading. It's very, very important. I mean, one of the things I'm working on at the moment, I've got 2 band 6s from community trying to come up with solutions for me. I just told them, I've got this problem, help me out. and it is quite easy to neglect yourself in all of this and not look after self. And I run a lot, and it helps me immensely. So I always say to people, if you then stop seeing me tweet or on Instagram about running, worry then if I stop running. But our chief nurse is also a midwife, Angela Heller. A lot of people know her. And it's been great to have somebody who's a midwife on the board and has got our ear. So we very much use her. She's our maternity safety champion. And I do reach out so that I'm not drowning or struggling or alone. And the home body in London has just been amazing as well.
And I think that's a fantastic note to end on. And thank you so much, Linda. That's been fantastic to have your story. I think we'll all learn a lot from that. And thank you very much for joining us. But I want to book you for the next instalment.
You know how to get a hold of me soon.
I do. Thank you very much, Linda.
Thank you. Enjoy your festival, everybody.